Chapter 2. A Free-for-All Makes the Front Page. The shabby old Apple Tree bookstore had hundreds of volumes stacked on dusty shelves that rose more than 10 feet on its two long side walls and two lower freestanding shelves in the center of the floor. Many ancient leather-bound sets filled one wall, and the opposite wall was filled with tattered pulp fiction paperbacks, which Paul had just finished inspecting. "It's amazing," he said to his brother, who was doing a similar job on the hardbound side. "Not even one decent title in the lot. I never saw such crap all in one place. Hard to believe these things were ever published," he continued to his brother, who had, for his part, just discovered a leather-bound set titled Diseases of the Horse, 1912 to 1914. "We'll have a going-out-of-business sale," Derek suggested, matter-of-factly, as if he had done this before. "If we sold them for a dime apiece, it might amount to a few $100s. Derek was the only partner who was even dimly aware of the almost complete lack of capital in their venture. "We just need to put a sign in the window." The storefront window, clouded with grime and cluttered with a pathetic display of books, stood on end like miniature accordions, faced onto the street at a stoplight on Farwell Avenue, a heavily trafficked one-way artery. When the stoplight was red, drivers would be sitting with just the sidewalk between them and the window, so they couldn't miss a sign if they just turned their head to the left. But anyone wanting to visit the shop would have to go around the block to find a parking spot, since there was no parking on Farwell Avenue. Paul didn't think they would do that for Diseases of the Horse or a romance novel written by nobody, but Derek pointed out they would not know anything about the actual books involved at that point. They might think there were rare first editions for the taking. Dave, to Derek's chagrin, was remaking the front door, a typical 1930s glass shop door with a set of entry jingle bells at the top. Chris had convinced him in bed that a coffee-house door should be more dramatic and mysterious. In fact, a kind of battled castle door that had to be creaked open to peer inside. So Dave had covered it with stained pine planks, onto which he had carved long furrows with a utility knife, presumably to simulate old sword damage. He planned a framed sign for the middle of the door announcing the music room or perhaps FBN sound systems. He hadn't decided which, because the identity of the enterprise fluctuated in his mind like a Necker cube. The new castle door weighed so much that it required a pulley and a counterweight to close once opened, which Dave had cleverly designed and installed. Smaller persons, petite women and children, could not push the door open at all and were swept back by the massive closing planks if they did not enter quickly enough. This ergonomic flaw was precisely the kind of mistake that Dave often made in his designs, and eventually the pulley system had to be disconnected altogether, leaving a romantic door standing open most of the time. Going-out-of-business sign construction, being vaguely literary in nature, fell to the English majors, Chris and Janie. "How about used books for 5 cents?" Chris suggested, with magic marker poised over a 4-foot piece of wide butcher paper which was spread out on the raised platform inside the front window. Jane considered the suggestion. "Not very interesting, I think," she mused. "How about valuable used books? All must go for only 5 cents. "Too long," Chris said, thinking of the lettering she would have to do. "And people will be reading it during a red light. What is that, a minute?" She was interrupted from further creative insights by the appearance of a slight, swarthy young man who had materialized, as if by magic, through the curtain in back of the cash register counter. "Who are you guys?" Jim Sloboda asked amiably. Jim was not adverse to sharing things, especially if they were not his to begin with. The Polish art student, who painted grotesque, primitive dancing black figures, had been using the back room for painting and, not incidentally, wrestling with his underage model on a fold-out hide-a-bed. Derek looked up from the hardbound books, surprised. "Are you the guy who has been using the back room?" he asked. I guess so. That's me. So how did you get in, anyway? I have a key to the back door, he said. He lied. Found it under the mat. Well, we have rented the building from the Freeway Commission. You shouldn't be there in the first place. We're going to use the back room to make electronics. Jim Sloboda sighed. Things had been going relatively well for months in his free studio. His plaster sculpting had clogged the double utility sinks in the back, but the toilet and the browned-out sink in the bathroom still worked. How soon do I have to go? He asked warily. You should take your paintings and whatever else you have in there and leave now, Derek said, in his most authoritative voice, thinking that the back door lock would have to be changed or the door nailed shut. Jim looked past Derek to the boy who was energetically gouging the heavy wooden front door with a construction knife, and decided that these people might be dangerous. His original studio, his parents' basement, would preclude working with his teenage model, but in truth, because she was so beautiful, the sex had been almost necrophilic. He decided that his mother's cooking was reasonable compensation. Without another word, he shrugged and disappeared back into the curtains. Sale 50% off all books proved a vast disappointment, attracting not even one customer in 2 days. Derek reduced the discount to 70% for 1 day, then 1-cent sale without effect. A garbage company wanted $60 to haul the books away as junk, which would turn the dream of adding capital to the business into a huge debt. Keeping the books on the walls was a possibility, but the freestanding shelves had to be cleared if the room was to be used as a coffee house. Harmon Anderson, Derek and Paul's father, whenever he was ridiculing socialism, would always say people could not resist free things. So before leaving at night, as one desperate experiment in capitalism, his boys taped a sign in the window with huge flaming red letters that read, "Free books, take all you want." When arriving late and hungover the following morning, Paul pushed the castle door open to a Haydn symphony roaring over the heads of at least a dozen customers rummaging through disorderly piles of books on the floor. Dave had placed 2 6-foot-tall speakers, which he called the Stonehenge model, against the back wall of the bookstore, powered with the very first working prototype FBN amplifier in the back room. All the books had been dumped onto the floor by tipping all the bookshelves over, creating chaos as the music roared over their heads. A customer had pulled his car up onto the sidewalk in front of the store and was piling books into the open trunk. Paul saw Dave and Chris across the room. "What the fuck?" he mouthed. Dave laughed back. "Greed," he mimed silently, gesturing at the crowd. "But why on the floor?" Paul asked as he approached. "We needed some drama," Chris explained, "so we just tipped the bookcases over." She was talking to a middle-aged woman who was taking notes, while a young man with a Nikon was taking shots of the action. "The media is here," Dave said, nodding at them. "We attracted some attention because of the traffic jam out front. There was a crowd already when we got here." "Offering something free is unusual," the Milwaukee Journal reporter was saying. "It's just not done anymore." "But they're all crap," Paul objected. "Free, but crap." "Doesn't matter. Free is what matters," Dave said. "They wouldn't buy them for a penny apiece, but for free, they're coming in the windows? Is there a message here?" Paul said, shaking his still painful head. "I can't see it." "The message is that we won't have to haul them away," Derek said, rudely pushing an old woman aside who was trying to carry all 10 volumes of Diseases of the Horse. "Making them all free means people don't have to choose which ones to take," Dave noted. "It frees up the whole process, I think, and we don't have to be nice to them." "I read that some medieval builders in Florence got peasants to haul away a mountain of dirt from a church dome construction site by starting a rumor that there were gold coins mixed into the dirt," Paul added, though he had not been to Florence or seen the Dome. There were no gold coins, of course, like our valuable first editions hidden in the pulp fiction. But people can read, the journal reporter said. What in God's name is that old woman going to do with all those volumes of Diseases of the Horse? She asked. She probably thinks she can sell them. I can't blame her for that. So did we, Paul admitted. It's just hard to believe and demeaning to the human spirit that a leather-bound covered book, written on linen paper with gilded edges and hand-drawn graphics, all the loving effort that went into creating it, can lose all of its value, become totally worthless. Paul gazed at the piles of books. How many lives were spent, wasted even, to write even the worst of these books? How many shoes or meals for children did they provide? Derek shrugged at his brother's flowery idealism. I think they'll use them as decoration in their living room bookshelves to make visitors think they're educated. Content doesn't matter, just how pretty the binding is. The reporter, Mrs. Bertha Plotaki, who had had her Pulitzer ambitions buried in bratwurst and cheese festivals for years, began to see a major story developing, one with political and philosophical dimensions. She totally agreed that when it came to the news, perhaps especially when it came to the news, it was mostly a matter of how pretty the binding was. In fact, her editor, who was opposed to the socialist temperament that prevailed in Milwaukee, agreed, and a large picture of the window sign and rummaging crowds made the front page of the Milwaukee Journal that evening. The boys were portrayed as Ayn Randian philosopher entrepreneurs, a new breed of socially conscious young people who were planning to open a proper business where the socialist bookstore had been. The rummaging crowds were meant to represent the worst of human greed, the very soul of socialism, in the editor's view. They don't mention the name of our electronics company at all, Paul complained, tossing the newspaper down. I specifically told that woman that all this coffeehouse business was just to demonstrate our new amplifier, and she missed that entirely. Doesn't even mention FBN sound systems. She doesn't mention the name of the coffeehouse either, Chris added. I guess she didn't want to seem like a commercial advertisement. Derek was disgusted. Well, the whole article does us no good then at all. People don't even know exactly where we're located. She doesn't even give the address, just that big picture of the free sign in the window. Think anyone will know we're at Farwell and North when this sign is gone? So let's leave the sign up, Chris suggested. We can have the music room sign on the door and leave the free book sign in the window so people will remember the front page picture. I was thinking we should put some curtains to shut off the window anyway, Paul noted. Coffee houses are dark inside, and they don't have a big store front window. And we can use the window display platform as a little Elizabethan stage of sorts, facing inward with the drapes as background. It will be just big enough for guitars and singers and poets. We'll need a spotlight or two and a microphone, Dave said, imagining the stage, practical as usual. The free book sale had eliminated all but one VW van load of books, which, because of the municipal dump wanted $2 a load, ended up in a deep ditch on the side of a small deserted rural road in Waukesha County. Dave wanted to set them on fire using gasoline, but Chris convinced him that it would draw too much attention, even so far out in the country. Dave, who was sometimes reckless with his use of fire, had once on a picnic in a farmer's grassy field tossed a handful of cherry bombs into the charcoal barbecue and set the entire field aflame when they blew burning embers everywhere. Chris had her hands full controlling Dave when it came to fire, especially if Dave's younger brother, Billy Gantz, was involved. Far too wild to be officially part of the FBN operation, Billy, the Kid, as he was known, occasionally ran errands and helped build things, but was not reliable enough to be anything more than a passing figure, a peripheral status that no one, including Billy, seemed to mind. The interior walls of the new coffee house were covered with rough, round burlap material, stapled onto the walls with wooden slats covering the stapled edges. Burlap, a material normally used to make farm bags, was incredibly cheap by the yard, as were the furring slats, which were treated with mahogany wood stain. The high ceilings had many ugly insulated water pipes running in all directions, servicing the radiators in the apartment above. Dave decided that these could be made to look like branches of trees by staining them with the mahogany stain in a pattern that looked like wood grain. Just reaching the insulated pipes on the ceiling required perching precariously on a 15-foot stepladder, a dangerous task that Billy took on without a second thought. "Why are there tree branches on the ceiling, Dave?" Derek asked, looking upward. They were stained from the water, looking like shit." "So you stained them more?" "So they look like tree branches," Billy added from on high. "And our coffee house has tree branches on the ceiling?" "Sure, why not?" "Weird, Dave, just weird." "I tried to cover them with burlap, but the staples wouldn't hold in the crumbly old insulation. Would have had to glue them. Messy. Fuck it." "Dave, you could have spray-painted them white again." "I suppose. We had all this stain left over from the slats." "The branches look great," Billy chimed in. "Who has branches on their ceiling, eh?" "It'll be dark inside. Do you think people would look up at a dark ceiling?" Derek asked gently. "Maybe," Dave allowed slowly, his practicality slightly offended. "We'll just light the ceiling so they do." Trips to both Goodwill stores had yielded a large carpet for the floor and 3 old stuffed couches with ornate coffee tables. A downtown tobacco store yielded Gauloise, blue-pack French black tobacco cigarettes, and Indonesian clove-flavored cigarettes, which were set out on the tables in little silver boxes, just as Paul had seen in his family doctor's waiting room. The twin Stonehenge speakers were set up on the small stage and wired to the amplifier and turntable behind the counter. There was no real business plan for the coffee house. It was meant to be fun and possible demonstration of the amplifier when they started to be produced in quantity. Although the microphone and spots were not installed yet, it was decided that the music room was ready and open for business.